The slice of red velvet cake didn't just hit me, it detoured my entire life. One second I was standing in my parents' sun-drenched conservatory, politely declining to hand over the keys to my $550,000 industrial loft. The next thick crimson cream cheese frosting was sliding down my cheek and onto my crisp white blouse. It looked like a jagged wound. My mother, Susan, stood panting, her hand still extended. "You selfish little brat," she screamed. "Brittany needs that aesthetic for her brand." I didn't wipe it off immediately. She was holding her phone up, making sure the lighting was perfect for the live stream. "Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." Most people would have screamed. They would have thrown the cake back, flipped the table, or dissolved into a puddle of tears right there on the hand-laid mosaic tiles. I stood perfectly still, letting the silence stretch until it became suffocating. I reached up, wiped a heavy glob of cream cheese frosting from my eyelid and flicked it onto the floor. It landed with a wet splat on the antique Persian rug my mother, Susan, loved more than she loved any of her children. The violence of the act had sucked the air out of the room. My mother's chest was heaving, her hand, still raised, eyes wide, not with regret but with the manic energy of someone waiting for me to submit. She wanted a reaction. She wanted the old Megan, the one who would apologize for having a face that got in the way of her projectile. My father, Richard, finally found his voice. It wasn't a voice of concern, it was a voice of annoyance. "You are ruining the brand, Megan," he bellowed, gesturing frantically at the mess on my blouse as if my stained clothes were a personal insult to his legacy. Brittany was still holding her phone up. She hadn't stopped recording. In fact, she had adjusted her angle to catch the light hitting the red streak on my cheek. I looked at them, really. Looked at them. For 29 years I had viewed these people as my family, a group I was contractually obligated to support and please. In that moment the contract dissolved. They weren't family anymore. They were liabilities, and I was an archivist. I knew how to handle things that were toxic and decaying. You document them and then you remove them from the collection. I didn't say a word. I stepped over the ruined cake, careful not to get any red dye on my suede boots, and grabbed my purse from the side table. "Where do you think you're going?" Susan screeched, her voice cracking. "We aren't done discussing the lease transfer." I walked out the French doors, through the manicured garden and toward the driveway. I could hear them shouting behind me, a cacophony of demands and insults, but it sounded like noise coming from a television in another room. It didn't touch me. I sat in the driver's seat of my Audi and sealed the door shut. The silence was instant and heavy. My hands were trembling, vibrating against the leather steering wheel, but it wasn't fear, it wasn't sorrow. It was the pure high-octane adrenaline of a soldier who realizes the treaty has just been violated and the rules of engagement no longer apply. I didn't start the car immediately. I grabbed a napkin from the center console and scrubbed the red stain from my cheek. It left a pink mark like a burn. Good, let it remind me. I didn't block their numbers, not yet. I needed them to think they still had the upper hand for a few more hours. Instead, I unlocked my phone and opened my email app. I didn't text a friend to vent. I didn't call a boyfriend to cry. I composed a new message to Patrick. Patrick wasn't a family friend. He was a real estate shark in a three-piece suit who cost $400 an hour. And he was the only person on earth who knew the truth about the deed to the Victorian house. I typed a single subject line: the deed. The body of the email was just as sparse, devoid of any emotion or explanation. "Execute the nuclear option. Send the notice immediately." My mother thought throwing a cake was a power move. She thought she was disciplining an unruly subordinate. She didn't realize she had just pulled the pin on a grenade and dropped it in her own lap. I hit send, watched the progress bar complete, and put the car in reverse. The war had started and they didn't even know they were already under siege. Why didn't I scream back? Why didn't I flip the table? Because in my family, silence wasn't weakness, it was a survival strategy. And as it turns out, silence is also incredibly expensive. For 29 years I had been the family's designated shock absorber. Brittany was the star, the golden child whose every tantrum was treated as a creative outburst and whose every failure was someone else's fault. I was the fixer. I was the one who made things disappear. When Brittany totaled her car at 16, my parents didn't make her pay for it. They quietly dipped into the college fund my grandmother had started for me to cover the difference. When Brittany decided college was too stifling for her creative spirit, they funded her year-long trip to Bali to find herself. I stayed home, went to state school on a scholarship, and worked 2 jobs. They didn't see my discipline as a virtue. They saw it as a permission slip to ignore me. I became a historical archavist because I liked things that were quiet, things that stayed where you put them. I liked order. I liked facts. And the fact was, I had been subsidizing my family's Delusion for a decade. My parents, Susan and Richard, lived in a beautiful Victorian heritage home that projected an image of old money stability. But it was a facade. They were house poor, obsessed with appearances, and constantly leveraging one asset to pay for another. And their favorite asset to leverage was me. I lived small. I drove a used car. I bought clothes on sale. I saved over 50% of my income every month for 7 years. While Brittany was posting unboxing videos of luxury handbags I knew she couldn't afford, I was researching interest rates and property values, and then I found it, the Loft. It was a gutted industrial space in a transitioning neighborhood, raw brick, massive windows, concrete floors. It was a mess, but it had good bones. I bought it for $550,000 cash. I didn't ask my parents for a dime. I didn't ask them for a cosign. I did it alone. I spent every weekend for a year sanding floors, installing fixtures, and turning that cold, empty shell into a sanctuary. It was the first thing in my life that was entirely, undeniably mine, but my family didn't see it as my home. They saw it as an asset. When I invited them over for the first time, I expected foolishly that they might be proud. Instead, Brittany walked in, looked around at the soaring ceilings and the perfect natural light and said, "This would be perfect for my channel." She didn't say, "Congratulations." She didn't say, "Good job." She staked a claim, and my parents, they nodded. They looked at my stability, my success, my peace, and they did the math, the narcissistic math. In their heads, my competence was a tax. The more I succeeded, the more I owed them. My stability wasn't a source of pride. It was a resource they felt entitled to harvest to subsidize Brittany's chaos. Brittany's rental was dark and cramped. Well, Megan has plenty of space. Brittany needs better lighting for her brand deals. Megan's windows are huge. Brittany is the star. Megan is the support staff. They honestly believed I would just hand it over. They thought that because I had never said no before, I never would. They thought my silence was consent. They were about to learn that silence is also the sound of a fuse burning down. I wasn't just an archavist. I was the keeper of the records, and I had receipts for everything. I returned to my loft, to my sanctuary. The high ceilings and exposed brick usually brought me a sense of calm, a feeling of expansion. Tonight, the air felt thin. I locked the heavy steel door, engaged the deadbolt, and leaned my forehead against the cool metal. I was safe here physically but digitally. The siege had already begun. My phone, which I had silenced in the car, was vibrating on the kitchen island like a trapped insect. I walked over and picked it up. 57 notifications. I didn't open them immediately. I went to the refrigerator, poured a glass of sparkling water, and sat on one of the bar stools I had refurbished myself. Then I unlocked the screen. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a frantic text from my mother realizing she had assaulted her daughter. It was a coordinated assault. Brittany had posted a story on Instagram. I watched it, my stomach tightening. She was crying perfectly, of course, with just enough mascara smudge to look tragic but not messy. She was sitting in her dim, cramped living room, the lighting intentionally bad to emphasize her plight. "I don't usually do this," she whispered to her followers, wiping away a tear. "But I just feel so betrayed. You think you know people and then they show you that they care more about material things than actual human beings. Sending love to everyone dealing with toxic energy tonight." She didn't name me. She didn't have to. The comments were already rolling in. "Omega babe, who hurt you? Jealousy is a disease. Get well soon to them and we got you queen." Then came the text from Susan. "No greeting, no remorse. You have 1 week to sign the lease transfer. Brittany has a sponsorship deal that depends on that loft's lighting. Don't be selfish. We can forget this whole ugly incident if you just do the right thing." The right thing to them, the right thing was me setting myself on fire to keep Brittany warm. Richard's text was shorter, colder. "I'm freezing your access to the family trust until you apologize to your mother and sister." I almost laughed. The family trust was a myth, a carrot they had dangled for years to keep me compliant. There was no money in it for me. I knew the accounts. I knew the balances. Every cent in that trust was earmarked for Brittany's startup costs or my parents' retirement. Threatening to cut me off from nothing was the ultimate bluff. I looked around my loft. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the massive windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. This space wasn't just a building. It was proof of my existence. It was proof that I could build something real without their help. And they wanted to take it not because they needed shelter, but because they needed content. The notifications kept pinging. Each one felt like digital shrapnel chipping away at my peace, but instead of breaking me, the barrage had the opposite effect. It calcified my resolve. If they had apologized, if they had shown even a flicker of hesitation, I might have paused. I might have reconsidered the nuclear option. But their entitlement was absolute. They truly believed they could bully me into submission. They thought I was still the quiet archavist who would fade into the background to avoid a scene. They didn't realize that archavists are patient, we are meticulous, and when we decide to close a file we seal it permanently. I put down my glass, I didn't reply to Brittany, I didn't text Susan, I didn't call Richard. I opened my laptop and pulled up the email I had sent to Patrick. Status update. I typed, "They are escalating, proceed with the petition to partition. I want them out." I hit send. Let them have their Instagram stories, I had the law. Patrick's office smelled like mahogany and intimidation. It was on the 42nd floor, high enough that the city looked like a circuit board below us. Clean lines defined boundaries, my kind of place. Patrick wasn't warm, he didn't offer me tea or sympathy, he offered me competence. He sat across his massive desk, a manila folder open in front of him. "You were right about the trust," he said, tapping a document with his Mont Blanc pen. I leaned forward. I knew I was right, but hearing it said aloud felt like oxygen. "Your grandmother was very specific," Patrick continued. "She knew your parents had expensive tastes. She left the Victorian house in a trust with a life estate for Susan and Richard, but there are conditions." He slid the document toward me. I scanned the highlighted sections. The legal ease was dense, but the meaning was clear. Condition 1, the life tenants must maintain the property in good repair. Condition 2, the life tenants must not commit waste or damage the property. Condition 3, the property cannot be used to secure further debt without the trust's approval. And the kicker, if any condition is violated, the trustee, that's you, Megan, has the right to petition for a partition sale. They've violated all three, I said, my voice steady. They haven't fixed the roof in 5 years because they spent the maintenance fund on Brittany's were brand. They've taken out a second mortgage without my approval and throwing food inside the house. Does that count as damage? Patrick smirked. It was a cold, sharp expression, assaulting the trustee on premises. A judge would certainly frown on that. It creates a hostile environment that prevents you from inspecting your asset. He pulled out a second document, the petition to partition. "This is the nuclear option," Patrick said. "Once we file this, there's no going back. It forces the sale of the property. The proceeds are split according to ownership share since your grandmother left you 50% outright and their life estate is now voidable due to breach of trust. They lose the house," I finished. "Minus your legal fees, the cost of repairs they neglected, and the cleaning bill for the rug," Patrick added. "But yes, they lose the house." I looked at the paper. It was just ink on wood pulp, but it felt heavy. This was the house I grew up in. This was the house where I learned to be quiet. Where I learned to make myself small so Brittany could be big. It was the stage for their theatre of appearances. If I signed this, I wasn't just evicting them. I was demolishing the stage. I thought about the text from Susan, "Don't be selfish." I thought about Richard's threat to cut me off. I thought about Brittany's tears for the camera. They believed they owned me. They believed my success was a tributary that flowed naturally into their river. They didn't understand that I was the dam. I picked up the pen. "File it," I said, "and serve them at the house. Make sure they're home." Patrick nodded. "Consider it done. Oh, and Megan, yes, you might want to stay off social media for a few days once they get served. The noise is going to get loud." "Let them be loud," I said, standing up. "I have the paperwork." I walked out of the office and into the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. I didn't look like a daughter anymore. I looked like a landlord who had just engaged a collection agency. The ride down was silent, but in my head I could hear the clock ticking. Tick, 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 the eviction notice was on its way. I was in the basement archives catalogue collection of pre-war maps when my phone rang. It was Patrick. The archives were my bunker, temperature-controlled, dimly lit, and devoid of the chaotic frequency of my family. I had been hiding down here for 3 days, avoiding the front desk, avoiding the sunlight, avoiding the inevitable ambush. "Tell me it's done," I said, peeling off my white cotton gloves. "It's done," Patrick said. "They were served this morning. But that's not why I'm calling." "Megan, are you sitting down?" "I'm leaning against a filing cabinet." "Does that count?" "We're in discovery," Patrick said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its usual polished, shark-like sheen. "We pulled Brittany's social media archives, you know, to establish a pattern of harassment, potential loss of reputation for the brand, that sort of thing. And we found something, a deleted file from the cloud. It wasn't just a recording. Megan, she was live streaming." My stomach dropped. "Live streaming? You mean the brunch, the whole thing?" She thought she paused it when things got heated, but she didn't. She just muted her microphone. The video feed kept running for another 4 minutes before she cut it. "What did it catch?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Everything," Patrick said. "It caught Susan screaming, grab her hair right before she threw the cake. It caught Richard laughing. It caught Brittany adjusting the ring light to make sure your humiliation was well lit. But Megan, it caught something else. What? The comments, Patrick said. It was live. People were watching and they were commenting in real time. They saw your mother assault you. They saw your father laugh. They saw Brittany pinning while you had frosting in your eye. I felt a wave of nausea followed instantly by a cold, hard knot of realization. I had been so focused on my own shame, on the private horror of that moment, that I hadn't realized the world had been watching. Why does this matter? I asked. It's just embarrassing. No, Patrick corrected, it's leverage. It's not just a property dispute anymore. This is documented assault with intent. We have video evidence of Susan instructing Brittany to physically harm you. We have evidence of Richard encouraging it. This is grounds for a restraining order, an immediate emergency restraining order that bars them from the property. Your property effective immediately. I closed my eyes. I pictured Brittany's perfectly curated feed, her soft, focused life, her aesthetic. I pictured my mother's obsession with appearances, with being the envy of the historic district. And then I pictured the video, the raw, ugly truth of who they were when they thought no one was watching. Red velvet stains harder than blood. That's what I had thought in the car, but I was wrong. The truth stains harder. Send it to the judge, I said. Already did, Patrick replied. The judge signed the order 10 minutes ago. We're not just evicting them, Megan, we're removing them. Police escort today. I hung up the phone. I looked around at the maps, at the history preserved in Mia sleeves. History was written by the victors, they said. But in my family, history had always been written by the liars, not anymore. Now we had the tape. I walked out of the archives and into the bright, harsh light of the lobby. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was going to watch the show. The following Sunday, my parents hosted brunch. Brittany had posted invitation on her story the night before, rising above the negativity. Family first, aesthetic vibes only. It was a performance. They were pretending the last week hadn't happened. They were pretending I didn't exist. I pulled up to the curb just as the caterers were unloading, but I wasn't alone. Behind me were 2 unmarked sedans. I got out of my car. I was wearing the same white blouse I had worn the week before. This time it was pristine. No stains, no apologies. I walked up the front paths, flanked by 2 unformed officers and a process server. I used my key, the one they hadn't bothered to change because they were so arrogant. They thought I would never come back. The sunroom was exactly as I remembered it. Light pouring in through the glass, expensive floral arrangements on every surface, the smell of fresh coffee and denial. Susan looked up from the table. She was laughing at something Brittany said. When she saw me, the laughter died instantly. Then she saw the uniforms. Megan, she said, her voice trembling. What is this? This is an eviction, I said. My voice was calm. Low, terrifyingly steady. You can't do this, Richard shouted, standing up so fast his chair tipped over. This is our house. We're your parents. Not anymore, I said. According to the trust documents you violated, you are tenants who have committed waste and assault on the property owner. And according to the law, you are trespassing. I nodded to the process server, who stepped forward and handed Richard a thick stack of papers, the petition to partition, the notice to quit, and the restraining order. Restraining order, Susan gasped, looking at the papers. For what? Throwing a piece of cake. For assault, the officer said, stepping forward. We have the video evidence, ma'am. It clearly shows intent to harm. Brittany instinctively had pulled out her phone. She was trying to film the police. I wouldn't do that, the officer warned her, pointing a gloved finger. This is an active crime scene investigation, based on your previous footage recording. Officers during the execution of a court order can be construed as interference. Put the phone down. Brittany's hand dropped. The colour drained from her face. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the director. She was just a witness. You have 30 minutes to gather your essentials. I said the locks are being changed at noon. Where are we supposed to go? Susan wailed, looking around the beautiful room as if the furniture could save her. I don't know, I said. Maybe you can stay with Brittany. Her lighting is terrible, but I hear the rent is cheap. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a delusion shattering. They looked at me, waiting for me to crack, to apologize, to fix it, but I just checked my watch. 29 minutes, I said. They didn't argue, they didn't fight, they scrambled. I watched them pack bags with a frantic, desperate energy. They took the silver, they took the art, they took the things they thought gave them value. They didn't take a single photo of me. When they walked out the front door, escorted by the police, they looked small, they looked ordinary. Without the house, without the brand, without the victim they had fed on for decades, they were just 3 people standing on a sidewalk with suitcases. I stood in the sunroom. It was empty. The light was beautiful, and for the first time it was mine. The sale of the Victorian house closed 30 days later. It was a cold, efficient transaction handled entirely by lawyers. I didn't attend the closing. I didn't need to see them sign the papers to know it was over. I just waited for the notification on my phone. When it came, it was just a number on a screen. $285,000. My share of the inheritance plus the equity they had tried to steal. I didn't buy a sports car. I didn't book a first-class ticket to Europe. I transferred the entire amount into a diversified index fund. To them, money was a way to buy attention. To me, it was a way to buy freedom. I heard through the grapevine, meaning Patrick, who enjoyed giving me updates a little too much, that my parents and Brittany had moved into a 3-bedroom rental on the outskirts of town. It has beige carpet, popcorn ceilings, and fluorescent lighting. It is the kind of place where no amount of ring lights can manufacture an aesthetic. Brittany's brand didn't survive the video. The internet loves a villain, but it hates a child abuser. And Susan's face twisted in rage as she threw that cake became a meme that no sponsorship deal could scrub away. They still trying to spin the narrative, posting vague quotes about loyalty and betrayal. But their audience has moved on. They are shouting into a void. I sit in my loft now. It is evening and the city lights are starting to flicker on through the massive industrial windows. The space is exactly as I designed it, clean, quiet, and mine. There is no shouting here. There are no demands. There is no one calculating how much of my peace they can harvest to fuel their own ego. People always tell you not to burn bridges. They say it like it's a bad thing, like you might need to cross back over someday. But as I look around my sanctuary, I realize that advice is for people who have healthy families. When the bridge leads back to a castle where you are the servant burning, it isn't an act of destruction. It is an act of self-defense. Burning it is the only way to keep them from crossing over to steal your peace. I watched the smoke clear, and for the first time in 29 years I could breathe. The air didn't smell like obligation anymore. It just smelled like home. I picked up my phone one last time. I didn't check their social media. I didn't look for an apology that would never come. I went to my contacts, selected family, and hit block all. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, script completed. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to save yourself, share this story. You never know who needs permission to walk away. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. God bless you. Thanks for watching.